Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I am joined by the head of the New York DEA, Special Agent Frank Tarentino. Hi, Frank.
How you doing, Nikki? Good to be here.
I'm doing well today. Yeah. Okay, so Frank, we met in DC recently at the DEA National Family Summit. And, I keep thinking about, you did a panel with an incredible mom. You brought up Rhonda, who lost her son to a fake pill made with fentanyl. And I wonder if you can just start by telling parents about her story and her son's story, because from what I'm learning, it's a very common story.
Yeah, Nikki. So first, thanks for bringing that up. It's something that means an awful lot to us here in New York in the DEA, and that is primarily working with the families across this country who have lost loved ones to this opioid crisis, specifically fentanyl. And the moms and dads across this country have really given us the opportunity to learn more about this crisis from their perspective, through their eyes, and having the unique experience of hearing a mom tell her story of her son or daughter's tragedy is really impactful. And so we started these family summits across the country. Every DEA division, all 23 divisions in the United States would have a family summit. And so during our first family summit in 2022 here in New York, we had it at our office at 99 10th Avenue, and we had a number of families from across the state, one of which was Rhonda. Rhonda Goldstein came and listened intently, as did many of the families, and as did we very closely listen to these moms and dads tell their stories. And at the end of one of the sessions, Rhonda had introduced herself to me and explained to me a little bit about her son Jonathan's story, and how she didn't feel as if the investigation was moving in the direction that she really thought it could lead or could move. And we, as I said earlier, we listened to her tell us a little bit more detail about the investigation and about Jonathan's story. And all I said to Rhonda, and what I've said to all these other moms and dads, is that we're always willing to listen, and we will do absolutely everything we can to look into their son or daughter's death and bring that investigation forward if at all possible. What we can guarantee is that we will do our best, but we cannot guarantee the outcome will be what we all want it to be, which is to provide them with the justice and some peace of mind that their loved one, was treated fairly, and as I said to you earlier, that the justice was served. And so in Jonathan's case, we quickly activated one of our offices in our northern part of the state, or northern part of the city, our Westchester office, and they looked into the investigation and they brought it to the United States Attorney's Office here in the Southern District of New York. They were very aggressive and very proactive in their investigative techniques, and they were able to bring an indictment against the man responsible for Jonathan's death and many others, as a matter of fact. And so that is a great illustration of when a mom speaks, we listen, but also the opportunity for moms and dads to share their stories. And that's what the family summits were all about. It's giving them that platform. It's allowing law enforcement, especially the Drug Enforcement Administration, to sit back and listen to moms and dads tell their tragedies to us so that we can learn from them. And that's the biggest takeaway, is that we learn a tremendous amount of information from the moms and dads. And it does give us the very unique perspective as law enforcement professionals to really stand shoulder to shoulder with these moms and dads across this country. So I would say it was a game changer for us. And I would say that it has allowed us to expand our investigative approach, and it has allowed us to expand our education, awareness, and prevention in a way like we've never done before.
Okay. And in Jonathan's case, he thought he was purchasing or taking a prescription medication, right? And it ended up being a fake pill made with fentanyl?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, in Jonathan's case, much like many young people across this country, they are administered a prescription medication from their trusted doctor, and they're getting that prescription from a known pharmacist. And unfortunately, like all too often they run out of their prescription and they choose the easy way, which is to get it from a friend or from social media. And I think we'll talk about social media later.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that anytime somebody is purchasing a drug on social media or on the street, it's going to be laced with fentanyl. And so that's the tragedy that struck Rhonda and her family with Jonathan's death.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we'll get into some more of the stats later, but quickly here, I think, was it 5 out of 10 of the pills that you guys are seizing have a deadly dose of fentanyl?
Yeah, that's correct. What's really remarkable about this story is that in 2021, when DEA first started publicizing the lethality in our pills that we were testing across our laboratories in the 9 different laboratories in the United States, we had data that was proven that 4 out of every 10 pills were lethal. That was 2021. 2022, that number went from 4 out of 10 to 6 out of 10.
Wow.
And then in 2023, it jumped all the way to 7 out of 10.
Mm.
And so why this 5 out of 10 is so important is because have seen a decline in the lethality that is in these pills, and we've seen some changes in the way that the drug trafficking organizations, specifically the 2 cartels, are selling their poison. And so that is a positive step forward for drug law enforcement, specifically the DEA, but it's also not enough. It's never enough.
Let's back up a little bit, though. So I remember when I first heard about fentanyl, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, a woman I know, her husband's a cop. He had arrested a homeless person who was on drugs, and it was suspected that it was fentanyl. He was on fentanyl, and the wife was really worried about her husband coming into contact with like the residue of the fentanyl in the car, and which he did not. But and then I really heard nothing about fentanyl for years, and then suddenly, being in this work, I'm immersed in a world where 75,000 Americans are killed by fentanyl every year, and it's not just drug addicts. It's increasingly teenagers or young adults who think they're taking the prescription pill and turns out to be made with a deadly dose of fentanyl. So can you describe what happened over the past few years? Why the explosion of fentanyl being available to children and the public?
Unfortunately, Nikki, we can trace this back, many, many years in terms of how this crisis began. And we have to look at the prescription medication abuse that was happening with the pill mills and the doctors that were irresponsibly prescribing opioids early in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And then, we did a great job along with our law enforcement partners of really educating the public, but educating our medical practitioners, our professionals in the medical field of how to responsibly prescribe medication for pain and for other reasons. And so we did a great job of driving that, I would say, irresponsible and illegal behavior down. And obviously that had an impact on overdose deaths. And then heroin really became prominent on the illicit drug market. And then we had a heroin epidemic. And then we did a really great job of driving heroin abuse down. And then all of a sudden the cartels realized that in around 2016, fentanyl became pretty common from mainland China. And oftentimes the fentanyl that was coming into the United States was coming directly from China in 2016 and beyond. And then around 2019, working with the United States, we were able to convince China to essentially schedule fentanyl. And in around 2019, we saw a decline in the amount of fentanyl, pure fentanyl, that was coming out of mainland China. And so what these criminal organizations, these Chinese criminal groups, working in collaboration with the I would say global criminal networks that are operating around the world, specifically the 2 cartels, Sinaloa and Jalisco, they started to manufacture the precursor chemicals in mainland China and ship them directly to Mexico, where they would then synthesize into the fentanyl powder and pills that flow into the United States. So you see this evolution of the opioid crisis where it is today, and specifically, as you mentioned earlier, we can estimate around 69% of all overdose deaths or poisonings are directly related to fentanyl. And if you look at that number today, that's around 200 Americans every day dying of fentanyl.
Wow.
That's a staggering number. Now that number has gone down. 200 is the number that we're comfortable saying today as it relates to the numbers that the CDC has provided us. We went from over 300 Americans dying every single day in and around 2023 to now just under 300. About 294 Americans are dying every day in the United States due to overdose deaths and or poisonings related to the opioid crisis.
Wow. Okay. And just a little bit more about fentanyl. So fentanyl is a drug used in hospitals for pain,
Yeah.
for severe pain, right? So we're talking about illicit fentanyl being the precursors coming from China, mainly to the labs in Mexico run by these cartels, and they're creating fentanyl powder and pills. Why are they using fentanyl? Why did they identify fentanyl as a illicit drug they want to put inside of these pills?
Well, I mean, first of all, fentanyl is the most highly addicting drug ever made. It's the most powerful opioid on the market today, on the illicit market. It is the most addicting and most readily available synthetic drug available to these drug cartels. And so it's a matter of efficiency for these drug cartels. This is a criminal business, right? So they run it much like the criminal version of Amazon. And so this is the most profitable synthetic drug that they can get their hands on. And that's why they've mixed it into all different types of drugs, because when they mix it into other drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin, it drives addiction. And because it is so highly addicting, customers want to come back for more. And when customers come back for more, they buy more drugs, and therefore the drug dealer makes more money, right? So it's a profit-driven, power-hungry, business that these cartels are involved in. And by the way, they don't care about who they harm. They don't care about the people that die from this, because there are enough customers lined up behind those victims who are poisoned. And so this is the business that they're in, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business. And fentanyl is the driver of that business.
Yeah. Okay. And I was going to ask what you answered already. People ask me, why would they want to kill their customers, right? And it's because one, they don't care, and two, there's plenty other buyers ready to go behind them, right?
Yeah. And I also think, Nikki, that it's more about the business model than it is anything else. They're really just trying to create that substance use dependency that comes from the fentanyl, the illicit fentanyl. The synthetic drug that fentanyl is so addicting that it's almost impossible not to want more of it. We do find that there are some people that are seeking out the high that comes from fentanyl. The problem is that they have no idea how much fentanyl is in the drug that they're taking. They have no idea sometimes that the cocaine they're purchasing actually has fentanyl in it. They have no idea that the Xanax pill or this Vicodin or the Adderall pill that they're buying has not just 2 milligrams, which is the lethal dose, but 8 milligrams of fentanyl in it. And so there's no real quality control or way of determining how much fentanyl is in each pill or in each bag of drugs that they're buying.
And I've heard it like a chocolate chip cookie effect. So when they're making a bunch of pills, some will have bigger chunks than others when they're kind of pressing the pills. And so they don't even know how much is getting into every pill. Is that right?
I think that's a really fair analogy of what, or metaphor of what we would be talking about when we're talking about these pills. This is why, quite honestly, the fentanyl test strip isn't the perfect model or the perfect mechanism to make sure that what you're taking is safe. And the reason is because, as you described, these pills are made in laboratories in Mexico. And those laboratories are in very austere conditions, in very rudimentary laboratories. There's no sophistication to these laboratories. They don't have high-end equipment. They don't have the quality control. They don't have the true chemists that we would have in our manufacturing companies here in the United States. But when they make these pills, they don't exactly measure each pill and each gram or each, I would say, milligram of fentanyl per pill, right? So there are what we call hotspots in these pills. And as you mentioned in your sort of metaphor of the chocolate chip cookie, that one area of the chocolate chip cookie could have two or three or four chips, right? So there's a big, I would say, consistent chocolate chip density of one part of the chip, the
Yeah.
chocolate chip cookie, right?
Yeah.
In the fentanyl pill, that could be, a concentration of 2 milligrams or more in one corner of the pill. So if you happen to
Mm-hmm.
test with your fentanyl test strip the other half of the pill or a piece of the pill
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't have that fentanyl lethality in it, then you're going to think, okay, well, this is safe. But the
Right.
reality is, to truly test that pill, you would have to mash up that pill in its entirety into a powder form and test the entire pill. But I don't believe that many substance use dependent people have the patience or the time to do that kind of testing. And so it's a false positive, really. It's a false sense of
Mm-hmm.
security to think that the fentanyl test strip is really going to keep them safe.
Yeah. One example of this is Chris Didier shares the story of his son Zach, who he lost to a fake pill made with fentanyl. And I think Zach and his friend bought from the same drug dealer, and his friend took it and he was fine. And then Zach passed away. So it can be from the same batch and be
Sure.
very different levels of fentanyl. Okay. So how big is this problem? Like, how many fake pills are we talking about? How many are you seizing every year?
Well, I mean, let's look at 2023 for the DEA, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about 2024. So in 2023, the DEA seized 80 million fentanyl pills across the United States, and we seized roughly 12,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. So the 80 million pills and the 12,000 pounds of powder equates to roughly 390 million potential lethal doses, enough to kill every American in the United States. So that's an astronomical number, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a number that we really can't wrap our heads around. We can't wrap our heads around the fact that in 2022, there were 110,757 Americans who lost their lives to the opioid crisis, right?
Yeah.
But then you've heard me say this before, but you break that number, 110,757. If you look at that number in a 12-month period ending in June of 2023, that number jumps to 112,323. So more than, right? So
Yeah.
that's 2022, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me just give you the numbers for New York. So in 2023, the New York division seized 4.4 million fentanyl pills and about 1,200 pounds of fentanyl powder, which equates to approximately 39 million potential lethal doses, enough to kill the state of New York twice. That's how many lethal doses we seized here in New York. Now, the good news is that, as I said to you earlier, now it's, instead of it being 7 out of 10 pills have a potential lethal dose, which, oh, by the way, is 2 milligrams, right? So I always tell people,
a few grains of salt, right?
yeah, I always tell people that if you have that sort of skill to take your salt shaker and pour out anywhere between 10 to 20 grains of salt onto your kitchen table, that would be a lethal dose of fentanyl. So it's not very much. We have a photograph, which you have seen, I know, is I think representative of a lethal dose on the tip of a pencil, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a lot. It's a very small amount. So now you go from 7 out of 10 to 5 out of 10, which is again a really great positive step forward for DEA and the rest of drug law enforcement. But now we look at the overdose death numbers. So we went from 110,757 in 2023. Now, when we look at, in 22, and now when we look at that number in 2023, it's about 107,440. So in a 12-month period from June of 2023 to June of 2024, this past summer, we saw about a 14% decrease in overdose deaths. So that's a really great positive step for the DEA and for our law enforcement partners in our fight to save lives. So we are making progress. It's very slow and incremental progress, but we're making progress. And I think this is something we can build on.
And that aligns with the fact that less of the pills that you're seizing have that deadly dose, which is progress. It's still awful that we're losing so many people to this. And so to bring it back to parents, like how many kids, probably don't have exact numbers on this, but how many of these pills are getting out to our children and teenagers?
Well, this is the really frightening aspect of the illicit drug market today,
Hmm.
and that has to do with technology and globalization. And what we have seen is the weaponizing of social media by these drug cartels.
Hmm.
They are selling their product on many different social media applications, many of which
Hmm.
many of which our children are using, whether it's TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook Messenger, or some of these other YouTube, type
Hmm.
social media applications. And so it is
Yeah.
more readily available. It is more accessible to our young people, and that's alarming. It's alarming
Hmm.
because we can't monitor every single thing that our children do, and social
Hmm.
media is essentially available to everybody, and every young person today has a smartphone, and they're accessing all of these applications on a regular basis. And so we were working really hard to educate the public, educate our caregivers, our educators, our parents, and our students, right? And
Hmm.
then as well as the social media applications, and all of the people responsible for governing those social media
Hmm.
applications. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to do the best that we can to bring all of this um, to a point where more people are focused on the lethality that exists and the dangers
Hmm.
that exists with illicit fentanyl,
Hmm.
but also just educate as many people as we can so that they can make better choices.
Yeah. Okay. And, I would say pretty confidently, just from what I've researched, if your kid is on social media, they will likely be exposed to some type of drug content. I think there was a stat from Snapchat: 500,000 Snapchat users are exposed to drug related content every day. So if us parents aren't telling them about this threat and about this topic, they're going to see it there. Why do you feel like drug dealers are using social media? Like, what are the aspects or the functionality that makes it a favorable space to sell the drugs?
So, Nikki, one thing that we have to understand about drug dealers, about these drug trafficking organizations, are they are always exploiting the most vulnerable. They're
Mhm.
always looking for opportunities and avenues to get to those substance use dependent people, to create new markets, to create new customers. They're always looking for the number one thing, which is to make money. And
Mhm.
so because they're driven by greed and because they're motivated by the bottom dollar, they're going to use any means necessary to get their poison from Mexico to the streets
Mhm.
of New York City or anywhere else in the United States. When
Mhm.
I first arrived here in 2022, as I transitioned from the SAC of Seattle to the SAC of New York, one thing our team here in New York started to think about and ask lots of questions around was, why was there so much fentanyl powder arriving here in New York City?
Mhm.
And we worked with all of our state, local, and federal counterparts. We looked at all the data. And what we discovered over the course of time is that the powder was coming here predominantly so that these street level dealers could mix in the fentanyl powder into all of their drugs, but
Mhm.
also because there were drug networks here in New York City that were essentially running their own pill mills, and they were taking the fentanyl powder with a number of different fillers and operating pill press machines in a number of different pill press operations throughout the New York City region. And
Mhm.
we were able to, with a really great investigation, disrupt 6 active pill mill operations, seize roughly 15 pill press machines, and millions of pills and thousands of pounds of powder. And
Mhm.
what we discovered, which is the most alarming aspect of this investigation, is we went from pills being pressed in Mexico to pills now being pressed in New York City,
Mhm.
to then seeing those same pills pressed in New York City that have nothing but fentanyl in them and filler now being sold on internet based pharmacies
Right.
available to anybody around the world. So
Mhm.
now, if you're going onto an internet based pharmacy and you think you're buying a Xanax or an Adderall or a Vicodin, you're
Mhm.
actually buying a fake pill that is a fentanyl pill that's pressed in the Bronx.
Jesus.
So
And the
that
DEA
is
issued a warning about this, right? So how do we tell? Should we just avoid online pharmacies altogether? Are there legitimate ones?
there are, and we've put
Okay.
some information out on our website, the
Yeah,
da.gov
I'll include
website.
that.
And there's some really great information on there about what you should look at and how you can responsibly purchase your pills, your medication. But the reality is this: there is no easy way to get a prescription pill. The only way to get a prescription pill is to go see your trusted doctor
Right.
and have your trusted family doctor issue you a prescription that you then go get filled at a known reputable pharmacy. And then you get that prescription dispensed to you by that pharmacist and you take it in accordance with your doctor's, direction and guidance. This idea that you're going to be able to buy cheaper pills online or that you're going to get, cheaper pills from a friend or on the streets is really reckless, irresponsible, and potentially deadly. And so we have to be mindful that there is no easy way to get your prescription pills. There's only one way, and that's the legal way, right? It's the way that it's intended to work, as I said to you, from a doctor to a pharmacist through a pharmacy, not, online at some, no name brand pharmacy that exists in another part of the world.
Yeah. And the drug dealers, though, I mean, they're making the pills look exactly like the prescription versions. The bottles are often even sealed. They seem to be sealed, right? So, and they have the right labels. Recently I was sent some links to some drug dealers on YouTube selling prescription pills, just openly hashtagging the names of the pills. I mean, just very obvious that this was a drug dealer selling prescription medication openly on YouTube. And I wonder what your experience is like with the social media companies. I want parents to understand here that the social media companies aren't doing a great job monitoring and removing this type of content. In my experience with these YouTube drug dealers, I reported them week after week, and still many of them are still active and selling these fake pills. So what's your experience with the social media companies and how they're helping to proactively protect our children from this?
We've had some success with these social media companies being more responsible and scraping their platforms for this content, and there's still a lot of work left to be done in this space, Nikki, and that's something that our DEA headquarters is working really closely with the different providers, the different networks, and the different platforms, and also within the whole of government sort of approach to holding them accountable. One of the things that I think will never change and that we have to be mindful of is what I said to you earlier, and that is that drug traffickers are always going to look to take advantage of vulnerabilities and vulnerable people. And so technology is one of those things that they can harness and they can really take advantage of to move their product, right? So what we have done in the DEA through our One Pill Can Kill campaign is really alert and educate the public about these threats. And we've provided them with cheat sheets, if you will, of these different social media emojis that is a coded language that drug traffickers use. And as parents, I think we have to be mindful of who our children are talking to via these social media applications and what content they're actually using and what content they're receiving on these social media applications, and just ask questions. We're not trying to ruin their exploration and their creativity and their youthfulness, but at the same time too, we know as parents that there are people lurking behind these social media monikers that are really just drug dealers, and they're really just trying to entice young people to buy their product. And as parents, it's our job to keep our children safe. And if that offends them, then that's what we do as parents, right? Like we have their best interests in mind.
Too bad.
Too bad, right? Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to get to in just a minute, a couple or a few tips for parents and how we can talk to our kids about this. But one thing that was really scary that I learned at the summit in DC was that like the cartels they're actively looking for the next substance, cheap addictive substance to use within their drugs that they distribute. And so I heard the word carfentanil. Can you explain what that is?
So, I mean, carfentanil is just another synthetic opioid that happens to be 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. So you can imagine just how deadly carfentanil is. And when we think about this drug legally manufactured in the United States is very, very small. In other words, we only allow these pharmaceutical companies to manufacture a very small, we're talking about gram quantity
Hmm.
of carfentanil for medicinal reasons.
Hmm.
So,
Isn't it for animals, pain relief
well,
even?
it
Not
is an
even.
animal tranquilizer, but in
Yeah.
the
Okay.
medical industry, there is a use for it, and
Okay.
predominantly for, as you mentioned, as a tranquilizer for large animals. But there's a
Right.
very small amount that is legally manufactured in the United States.
Hmm.
And as I said to you earlier, it's gram quantities.
Hmm.
So when we see carfentanil on the street, it's illicit. It's not diverted from a manufacturer here in the United States. This is illicit carfentanil being manufactured, most likely with the assistance of these Chinese chemical companies in mainland China and all the
Hmm.
precursor chemicals that are flowing into Mexico. And it's being manufactured in Mexico. And then that's coming into the United States.
Hmm.
And we have seen an increase, a very slight increase in carfentanil ending up in our drug supply here in New York City. And
Hmm.
we are working with our state and local counterparts to try to identify where that is coming from, identify
Hmm.
the source. But this is the risk that we all are in when we talk about the illicit drug supply today. This is such a
Yeah.
complex, ever changing environment. The synthetic drugs have changed everything. The
Hmm.
plant based drugs will never go away. But if you're talking about efficiency and effectiveness, the synthetic drugs are the way of the future. And so that's why all these cartels, these drug trafficking networks are using synthetics
Hmm.
to essentially make more money and get more drugs out into the customer base.
Hmm. Okay, and we talked a lot about pills, but what about marijuana or THC vapes? Like, is fentanyl being found in those products as well?
So, Nikki, as of this conversation, we have not yet seen any evidence of fentanyl ending up in marijuana and or
Okay.
in vape pens. It
Okay.
doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means that our 9 laboratories across the United States have not indicated this happening yet. Now, we
Okay.
have had one instance here in New York where there was fentanyl residue inside of a bag that was largely loose leaf marijuana. But
Hmm.
what we suspect in that scenario is that the fentanyl powder was in the bag to begin with,
Hmm.
the residue,
Hmm.
and then the marijuana got mixed into it.
Okay.
So it's something to be mindful of. It's definitely something that, as I said to you earlier, could happen, but we haven't had any indication or evidence of that yet.
Okay. Good to know. Okay. So, what do we tell our kids as parents? How do we protect them from this threat?
Well, I think they have to understand that illegal drugs are far more powerful and far more dangerous than they have ever been before,
Hmm.
and that any pill, any drug that they take that's not from a doctor or pharmacy is potentially deadly. All of these fake pills are fentanyl pills today, right? It's just a matter of how much fentanyl powder and or lethality is in each pill, right? We
Hmm.
know that they're going to be laced. It's just that, is it going to have less than 2 milligrams or is it going to have more than 2 milligrams? So
Hmm.
what we would want to tell our kids is that you can't take these fake pills. You cannot buy pills from your friend or from the internet or from social media, because
Hmm.
that pill is going to kill you. I know it sounds like a scare tactic, but that's the reality that we're in today. If you said to me that you had a 5 out of 10 chance of having something successful or unsuccessful happen to you, those are good odds in both directions, right? But
Hmm.
if you said that you have a 5 out of 10 chance of dying if you ate this specific piece of food, or if you drank this specific type of liquid, or if you ingested this pill, those are not good odds, right? And we've gone from 7 out of 10 to 5 out of 10. That's a positive development, but still 50% of the chance of you dying is not a good number, right?
Hmm.
And so we have to tell these children that this is a reality. This is not, as I said to you earlier, a scare tactic. This is factually scientific based evidence that
Hmm.
is proven, and that's why people are dying. When we talk about these numbers, Nikki, I don't know if any of us can really wrap our heads around what 110,000 Americans look like,
Hmm.
right? That's
Hmm.
110,757 Americans in 2022 is just an astronomical number.
Yeah.
107,440 is still an astronomical number,
Hmm.
right? I mean, this is more than car accidents, more than gun violence, and more than suicides.
Hmm.
It's the number one killer of people between the ages of 18 and 45. If that
Hmm.
doesn't drive home the point of how serious and dangerous this is, so as a parent, I would want to tell my kids as often as
Hmm.
possible that
Yeah.
they need to be mindful of what they're putting in their bodies. And
Yeah.
that this idea of recreational use or this idea of exploration or of experimentation, it's now deadly. There is no experimenting. There is no exploration. There is no self-discovery. It is only death.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's the message.
Yeah, I mean, a generation ago, people could experiment, they could make mistakes, and they didn't die from those mistakes. And we're seeing more and more teenagers who are at an age where they're supposed to experiment and make mistakes. And this is something they can't experiment with. For me, it was interesting. Recently, my kids came home and told me that some kids in their class has gotten sick because they took a pill from another child that was a fish pill. That is what they said. And digging into it, I realized some kid had brought fish oil vitamins to school and had given them out, and a few kids had thrown up. And so that was my opportunity. I mean, you can proactively talk about this without having an example, but that was my opportunity to say, look at what can happen if you take something that's not given to you by a doctor or your parent. Kids are curious, right? They're going to put it in their mouth like they are, and even at young ages. And so this is something I can talk to my 4-year-old about is medication is not safe. Pills are not safe. Medicine's not safe unless it's from your parent or a doctor.
That's right.
One thing that I thought would be helpful too is for teenagers especially. Teenagers know that this is going on. They know kids are taking prescription pills, fake pills, in their school. And I think like see something, say something is really important here.
Yeah.
To tell your kid, like, you could be saving someone's life, and it can be anonymous. You can report it to the school or to a parent. And I think that's a really important part of this is it's okay to tattle when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, Nikki, I think you're right. I think that, what's really tragic and sobering is when we go around and we talk to all these
Mm-hmm.
different schools, all these different
Mm-hmm.
students and educators. They're all affected by this. They're all impacted in some way, shape, or form. They know somebody, whether it's a relative or if it's a friend or if it's a classmate. Like there's somebody somewhere in their network that is impacted. And
Yeah.
so this is not just, specific city problem or specific state problem. This is a, a whole of the United States problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't pretend that anybody is safe from this, right?
Right.
We can't
Yeah.
pretend that because you're affluent or because you're educated or because
Mm-hmm.
you live in a nice area or because you went to a nice school. No. The entire community that we all, are
Mm-hmm.
responsible for, every city, every state, every single school in the United States is potentially impacted by this. And so when we hear from educators like, oh no, we don't really have a problem of substance use in our schools,
Mm-hmm.
it really sends chills down my spine to think that there are people out there that still don't see this and recognize
Mm-hmm.
this as a US wide problem.
Yeah.
And as parents, we can't pretend that our children aren't impacted by this
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or exposed to it, right? Like we have to assume that they know somebody, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
that is maybe taking a pill or getting a pill or who knows somebody who's selling pills. We have to understand that when you do say something, you're saving somebody's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of insinuated like you can't assume this isn't going to happen to your kid, even the one to take the pill. And I've interviewed maybe 10 plus parents who've lost children to a fake pill made with fentanyl, and every single one of them never would have imagined this happening to their family or their child. And so this is something that very well could happen to any family. And so there is a medication that you can stock in your home that you can administer if this does happen to your child. Can you talk about that medication, naloxone?
Yes. So, Nikki, we said earlier that there's in a 12-month period from June of 23 to June of 24, a 14% decrease in overdose deaths, right? We can attribute that to a number of different things. One is enforcement.
Hmm.
We've done a really great job of attacking the entire illicit supply chain of fentanyl, right? And it's why we've seized so many pills. It's why we've arrested and prosecuted so many high level Sinaloa cartel members.
Hmm.
The second most important thing we've done is educate the public,
Yeah.
and specifically the moms and dads, the families, and they have
Hmm.
become our advocates and our champions of this message. The third thing
Hmm.
that we can attribute this decrease to is quite honestly Narcan.
Hmm.
There are a lot of lives being saved every single day because there is this antigen to fentanyl overdoses, right? And
Hmm.
Narcan should be available. It should be in schools. It should be in places where it's easily accessible. I can tell you that we give every single DEA agent Narcan to carry with them for their safety and for the safety of their fellow agents and
Hmm.
task force officers. And then we also have Narcan in our building. We have it in different first aid stations around the office because there is this um, possibility of an accidental, overdose from handling property or from handling evidence
Hmm.
that has fentanyl residue on it.
Yeah.
Um, so, again, I wouldn't suggest for a moment that anybody walking around the city of New York is going to all of a sudden accidentally become exposed to fentanyl poisoning.
Hmm.
What I would
Hmm.
say is that, there is this possibility that when you're in an area where there's high concentrations of fentanyl, whether it's a drug mill or a lab or a stash house, and there's powder residue that gets in the air and gets on articles, and then you touch that article and then you put it in the corner of your eye, or you lick your finger, now you've ingested fentanyl. And there's
Hmm.
this chance that you could overdose. And so Narcan availability is life-saving. And
Hmm.
so we can attribute this decrease to those three things and many other factors. But
Hmm.
yes, Narcan should be available.
Okay. And you can get it over the counter, right? At most major pharmacies.
Yes, it is
Okay.
available.
And I actually have a sample.
Yep.
It's super small, easy. I just keep it here because I talk about it a lot, but you can keep it in your medicine cabinet, keep one in your car. I think a good question for parents to the schools is, do you guys have naloxone or Narcan's, the brand name, stocked at the school? I know one of the parents at the summit worked really hard for years to get naloxone stocked on airplanes. What was it? United? I think it was United Airlines, all the airplanes.
Oh, nice.
So that this is a big deal that we have this accessible just in case. And then one thing I learned too is if you do have to administer this, that you still have to go to the hospital, right? Because I think the naloxone wears off quicker than the fentanyl. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
A lot of times when we train our agents, we tell them to, first of all, that you're not going to hurt somebody
Hmm.
if they're not in an
Okay.
overdose state, right?
Good to know.
Administering naloxone or Narcan is not going to injure anybody in any way, shape, or form. What
Hmm.
what they need to be mindful of is that it may take a couple, two or three administers or doses of Narcan to bring that
Hmm.
person out of that overdose state. And they have to be mindful that they can quickly relapse into that overdose state, and that they
Hmm.
may even be agitated when they come out of it. Um,
Okay.
so there are a lot of factors, but the most important thing is having it available and then administering it. It's very simple. It's a nasal spray.
Hmm.
There's really no skill that's required. You just
No.
remove the cap and spray it up somebody's nasal cavity.
It's that easy when you look at it.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to say here too, like, what are some of the signs? So, because I've talked to so many of these parents, they walked in and their child was unresponsive,
Yeah.
and none of these parents had any idea that it could be fentanyl. And I don't think any of them that I've talked to has had naloxone or Narcan stocked in their house. But what are some of the signs that a parent should know or anyone should know that could be indicating a poisoning or an overdose?
So, Nikki, you said it first. Non-responsive. That would be
Yeah.
your first indicator.
Okay.
Secondly, depressed breathing, low heart rate, blue lips.
Hmm.
Somebody that has shallow breathing is somebody that is potentially and won't wake up, is potentially poisoned in or in an overdose state. So, like I said to you earlier, there's no harm if you administer the naloxone or the Narcan
Okay. Yeah.
at that particular point. Now, you should definitely call 911, and you should
Yeah.
stay with the the person who's in this state as long as possible until emergency services arrive, and you may have to continue to administer Narcan or naloxone until they arrive. But
Okay.
I think just being conscious and aware of not just the state that they're in, but what's around them. Did they see anything? Did they see an empty pill bottle? Did they see some residue, or is there some indication that there's something going on? And that might give them a better idea of whether or not it was a drug-induced, overdose.
And I will add, have access to their phone and their social media accounts. Because I
Yes.
know a lot of the evidence can be within there. And if you don't have their passcode and they've passed away, it's sometimes impossible to get in, or can take many months and lots of money. I mean, there's teenagers that just won't they're alive, that something happened, and they just won't let their parents into the phone, won't give them the passcode. So it's really important for us that's our device that we let them
Yeah.
use, and we need to have ownership of it and have access to it.
The device is really a key ingredient in our ability to bring a successful and prosecutable investigation forward. A lot of times, having access to the device will identify possibly where they got their fentanyl pill or the poison that they ingested, and it does allow us to have a much greater perspective of the organization that is around this criminal activity. And so a lot of times our successful prosecutions are a direct result of the immediacy in which we can get to the scene, have access to the device, talk to the family, and get that toxicology report back, and then work the investigation. And we've been really successful here in New York City and across the country in bringing those death resulting cases. And it's also because of the parents talking to us and sharing their stories and asking us to do more that we've had the Rhonda Goldstein successful operations investigations. And so we're moving in the right direction. It's definitely something that we can do more and better in. But I will tell you that our DEA.gov site is a treasure trove of information. Operation Prevention is a great resource that I would encourage parents, caregivers, and educators to go to. There's a number of recent and say prominent stories that will help educate these parents so that they can help educate their kids.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Okay. And then I will also link to the One Pill Can Kill resources, also the alert about the online pharmacies. I found that to be really helpful to know what to look for to see if it's legitimate or not. Although I still don't think you should buy your pills from an online pharmacy.
Yeah.
And then I also encourage parents to listen to the stories that I've shared on the podcast previously from the families who've lost their child. And if you have a teenager, have them listen too. I know it can be hard to hear, but I think it's the reality for a lot of families, and important to understand the stories and the human experience behind them, because it is so relatable how this is happening. And so, Special Agent Tarentino, thank you so much for this conversation and for spreading awareness. I think this education and awareness is making a big difference, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for the opportunity. The DEA is very proud to lead this fight, and that's exactly what it is. It's the fight to save lives. And we believe every single day that we are changing lives and communities one life at a time. And so with all of our state, local, and federal counterparts and people like yourself, sharing and educating the public with this information is really, really important. So we thank you for the work that you do, and it's been my honor and privilege to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you.